autism treatment industry, and maybe just tell me a little bit about your backgrounds.
Sure. Well, once upon a time, I was a nuclear medicine technologist. I had zero knowledge whatsoever about autism or anything having to do with it. And in 2014, I got married, and first comes love, second comes marriage, then comes a baby in a baby carriage. I had a little girl who was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder very young. She was 2 years old. And in the process of trying to find treatment for her, we discovered applied behavior analysis, and also discovered that ABA for short is not nearly common enough. There are not very many providers out there, and they're few and far between. They kind of congregate in big cities. There's not too many in rural areas at all. And I was having trouble finding a place for her. Lots of places had waiting lists, and it was terrible and awful, and you just want to help your baby and you can't.
Sure.
So we decided to open my own, and it grew way quicker than I could have ever imagined. I had no experience in it, but thankfully I had wonderful people help me out, just like Joe, and we built something wonderful. And we pride ourselves on being a very high quality center, because most of the franchisees are very near and dear to autism, and we're passionate about what we do.
Thanks. And Joe, could you tell me a bit about how you connected with Nicole and how you also entered this industry?
Absolutely. So once again, thank you for having us back. I'm born and raised in São Paulo, so moved to Florida in 2002. Went directly into business ownership and ended up working with a company called United Franchise Group. And I did that for a number of years, traveling and selling franchise, especially internationally. Then in 2012, my firstborn, Samuel, came in our lives. And when he was about 15 or 18 months old, we also noticed a few things that making a long story short, it turned out to be what they refer to as the high functioning autistic kid. Okay. So that's how my wife and I got into this. My wife actually went full blown, change industry. She went back to school. She actually becoming a analyst now. We are, I want to say, just a couple of months before she can actually get her certification. We actually do plan to be franchisees as well. And the way I got to get involved with Nicole and this amazing company is I was in the entertainment business into 2020 at a company called iFly Indoor Skydiving. I'm sure you've heard of them. And unfortunately, with the COVID, that industry got devastated, as we all know.
Sure.
So I actually I reached out to Nicole because we wanted to start our first unit here in Florida. And she was like, "Oh, that's great, but I also need help," And we ended up talking, and next thing you know, I'm working with this amazing company. So that's in a nutshell. We're really passionate about this industry. We are actually a very close relationship with this industry with our kids, which makes us, love them much more.
And do you see, is that how most people enter into this industry from a business side? They have a child or a niece or nephew that is on the spectrum?
Most people do learn about ABA and what it is because they have a child with autism or know someone with a child with autism. So we do see a lot of parents that are franchisees, but some very savvy business people that find us through great recommenders like Vetted Biz.
Sure. Yeah, no, it makes sense. And we'll go more into the numbers, as I think it's like a dual, it's great social good, and then it is also pretty profitable business. It'd be good to just start. How big is this market? How big is the autism treatment industry?
So this industry is expected to be well over $2 billion by 2026. Okay, and there are several reasons for it. I mean, there are studies out there showing, but the numbers are ever increasing, Patrick. The latest study from the CDC shows 1 in every 54 kids in America are somewhere within a spectrum. That number is actually a lot higher with boys. It's actually 1 in every 28. Okay.
And is this something there's more diagnosis, or is the actual rate increasing, or that's still uncertain from a medical standpoint?
So when you go into that tangent, I mean, people give you their perspective. The way I personally believe is because of awareness. When you go and you look back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, remember that weird kid at school that everybody was like, that kid is, there's something that is, that kid was probably autistic, but we didn't have enough awareness at that time to someone to sit down and say, hey, let's get this issue diagnosed, and then let's go into treatment.
And have there been studies like when you start getting treatment at 2 years old, 3 years old, that their impact in their personal life, career is that much better?
I'll let Nicole handle this one.
Absolutely. There are 50 years of research studies done on when and how much is the effective amount of treatment. And the earlier you start and the harder you start, the better the child does. And mostly because, autism is a result of a brain disorder. It's a brain abnormality. Sometimes it's actual physical form, or it's neurological development. And when you're young, when you're under 5 years old, your brain is developing at a very rapid pace. I mean, you're a baby, your head's this big, and then you grow to a full-size adult head by the time you're 5. So that's when most of your brain growth happens. And if you can, so to speak, exercise that muscle while it's growing, it can actually help the development of that child, and you carry those skills out into adulthood. So the earlier, the better.
It's exciting. So tell me, I imagine a big part of your job is then just bringing awareness and educating the general marketplace.
Absolutely. And we have a special community outreach program where we do just that. We have, we throw events for special needs kids, and at those events, we talk to parents about what you can do, what ABA is, what autism is, and what it means. Doesn't mean your child is going to be disabled for the rest of their lives. They can live independently. They just have to be taught how.
That's great. Well said. And we've actually, from Visa Franchise, we've had at least 3 clients that moved to the US. And that was the principal reason, that the US is more on the forefront of autism treatment. And a lot of countries are way behind. And I could see had we met 4 years, 5 years ago, I'm sure, some of those clients would have preferred to invest in this industry directly.
I think a lot of that has to do with stigma as well, because in America, mental health is becoming something that is very accepted in society. Whereas in other countries, especially third world countries, it's still very shameful to seek help. And so it prevents a lot of parents from even admitting that their child has a disorder. And then they really don't seek help. They just hope they grow out of it or some other.
And I can see in some cultures where it's like very male dominant, and if the rate is higher with males, it's that much more compounded.
Exactly.
Joe, maybe you could tell me a little bit, because I know you're also a business broker and you study and you go through so many businesses, just to tell a little bit about the average industry returns and this general marketplace from a financial perspective.
Absolutely. Being a business broker for almost 10 years now, and the one very particular thing you see is that there aren't any ABA centers for sale. That is usually a very good indicator when
I think you showed one, and it was at like a crazy multiple.
It was insane, and I believe I did even send you like their BLI. They were in Miami actually, and they had 43 Medicaid clients. They were in business for less than 3 years, and they sold for $2.8 million.
Wow. Any idea like what revenue they were doing to sell at that high?
They were doing the average, which is roughly about $1.8 million in gross revenue. Of course, your net's going to vary greatly where you are, but expected to be somewhere between 25 and 35%.
It's very healthy.
And
you see most of the centers in the industry are owner operated, where the owner is working day to day in the business.
The small ones are, but then you talk about the big centers, the big names out there. Then these are conglomerate, with thousands of employees, and I believe that's exactly what happened with the one in Miami, it was actually bought out by a huge company that was just acquiring anything there is in the market.
That makes sense. And how are payments handled? I imagine it's mostly private insurance for success on the spectrum.
So far, all of our SOS franchisees are working on a private health insurance only model. We can accept Medicaid if that particular state has that approved. Obviously, Texas does not, New York does not, but Florida does, Georgia does, and most states, I mean, all states have been mandated by the federal government to cover ABA. They're just kind of in the process of setting up that service. So by the end of 2022, everybody should have the ability to accept Medicaid if that's what they want to do.
Well, that's great. I'd say about 30% of vetted biz clients are moving to Florida. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And besides Florida, Texas, California are some of the hot states. California, not as many people moving to, if you look at like the percentages, but it's just such a large market and a lot of people are still sticking around California and surprisingly opening up businesses, but many of them moving to Texas or New Yorkers moving down to Florida. So how does it work out? Like the clients pay on a monthly basis?
So as we give services to the child, we send claims out to the health insurance. We have a program that we use that does all of it electronically. And the health insurance companies directly reimburse us for the services, usually direct deposit. We send a claim out to them and we see the money arrive in our bank anywhere between 2 weeks to 35 days from the day we submit that claim.
Great. And are you getting involved like with negotiating with the insurance? Because imagine a franchisee that has never done business before leaving the corporate life. I imagine it could be pretty overwhelming dealing with insurance. I know from a personal standpoint it can be. Nonetheless,
it can be overwhelming. Yes, absolutely. So most of our franchisees have no experience whatsoever. We train everybody to do absolutely everything. We do a lot of hand-holding, especially in the beginning, and negotiating reimbursement rates and contracts with private health insurances, because you do need a contract with each and every one of them. We usually do that hand in hand with you to make sure, I mean, our goal is for our franchisees to be successful, because we do want to be a successful large company, and that it's our mission to help you be as successful as possible, and we will help them negotiate their rate.
And what's the average cost? What's the average price per month, or what's the range for the clients that they're paying?
The average client pays between $8,000 and $10,000 a month for their services. Again, that varies depending on which state you're in, which insurance company you're negotiating with, but it's quite comfortable amount.
Sounds like it. And so they're having what, 10 to 35, 40 kids per center?
That's correct. Most of the clients are full-time clients. They come with us, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They don't go to school. They just stay with us. The average client stays with us for 3 to 5 years before they transition into the school system. So we follow them for quite a long while. And
when do they usually start?
We start as early as 18 months old. So essentially, as soon as you're old enough to obtain a proper diagnosis, we're able to treat that diagnosis. And so far, we go up to 18 years old, simply because at the moment, most insurances stop paying for treatment at 18. But I have a feeling that's going to change, and that will be extended, and we'll be able to serve older kids.
Great. So if an SOS franchise was around when your kid was 12 months old, you would get in the process to enroll them at 18?
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of babies in the clinic. Those are our favorites.
And tell me a bit about your plans to grow. So you have a couple corporate locations in the greater Houston area, a few franchises already open, 7 or so in development. Curious to hear a little bit about your plans for growth.
So far, all of the clinics that are open and existing at the moment are all in Texas. But we have franchisees in the process who have signed, who are getting their offices ready and painted. It'll happen any day now. We have them in New York, in Georgia, in Florida, and my goal is to expand across the entire United States. These services are needed everywhere, absolutely everywhere. The demand is so high, and it is our mission to provide access to services to the kids that don't have it.
And how much, I guess, tell me, who's your ideal franchisee? I mean, the numbers seem great. It's a good social good. I can see a lot of people being interested in investing in SOS franchise. Who's your ideal candidate to be a success on the spectrum franchisee?
As Joe mentioned earlier, there are a few very large companies out there that are gobbling up mom and pop clinics. And those clinics are not owner operated. It's one head honcho at the top, and they assign little managers everywhere. And the quality really gets lost in that type of model, which is why we decided to franchise. We want owner operators. So we want someone that is going to be present at the clinic, not all the time, but 20 to 30 hours a week. We need you to be involved with your staff, not with the kids, with your staff. The better your staff is, the higher quality services you can provide. You take care of the employees, they take care of the client. So we like really high involvement. You don't need any sort of experience. We teach you how to do everything, but you need leadership skills. You need people skills.
So a big part of the team and getting them excited. And I imagine it can be draining.
It can be. But we have a lot of client and staff retention strategies, and we teach you how to keep morale up in your team. And we talk about leadership skills, and as a CEO, what your job is and how you do it well, and how do you gauge yourself if you're doing well or not. And we help you with that, not just at the beginning when you first sign, but we actually send out a survey once a month, and we track your KPIs, your key performance indicators, which can really tell us how well you're doing and allow you to know if you're doing everything right. And if you need help, we come right back there to help you.
So for these centers, you have generally the owner, the franchisee CEO, and then underneath you have maybe a couple admins, and then you have individual techs.
Absolutely right. So we are a one-on-one service. So there is one technician per child. The CEO, obviously, at the top is just going to handle hiring and firing and payroll. We have an office manager that takes care of the office, checking people in and out, answering the phones, making the schedule. The analyst, which is a master's degree, which is what Joe's wife is now about to become, so proud of her. The analyst is the one who creates the education plans for the children. Each child has an individual plan that's different than everybody else's, and they train the techs to work with the kids. So the CEO stays over everybody, kind of generally make sure everybody's doing their job, but the hardcore training and the details are all left to your admin.
And then your competitor, is it industry standard that it's one tech per client?
It should be, Patrick. Okay. It should be. A lot of ABA centers say they're doing that, but they're really not. And there's no oversight. There's no regulation in our industry, which is why quality can vary greatly from one business to the next.
Why applied behavior analysis, ABA, versus some of the other treatment options? I'm sure you two explored everything.
Oh, yes, we did. Joe once mentioned things like the Brain Balance Center, which is a very popular franchise, of course, but these things are not scientifically proven. ABA is the only data-driven, scientifically proven effective treatment for. It's recognized by the Academy of Pediatrics. Medical boards who've ever acknowledged ABA at all say that this is the way to go. There's nothing better. There's nothing better out there. And
it sounds, if I had to make like an analogy, last week I had the franchisor of a preschool system, and it's like kind of daycare on one side and preschool on one side. And I think what for your industry, it would be like kind of a daycare on one side where it's just a place people go and there's minimal scientific backing, and then your guys where it's backed by science and more like a Montessori type education in that parallel market.
Well, it's more medical treatment, not education or daycare. But it's it's kind of like, do you want to, if you have high blood pressure, do you want to take the medicine, or do you want to get massages from your from your voodoo witch doctor that has acupuncture? Sure, some people say, oh, it works, but there's no science behind it. There's no proof behind it. There's no evidence behind it. You got to have the research. You got to have the studies that show that it works.
So ABA, it's backed by research, and you two found that that's the best solution for your kids, and you want to spread that to others, it seems like.
Absolutely. I mean, most doctors, they would actually advise parents to go get ABA right away once there is a diagnosis, depending on the spectrum. And when we talk about the spectrum, Patrick, is so broad, right? Yeah. I talked about my kid who's, considered high functioning, but then you have everything else, all the way to all the other extreme, which is the kids, the nonverbal, the aggressive behaviors. It's a lot harder. So in those, medication actually may be also a good option. I used to be like completely against medication, but until I start to really dive into the industry, and in certain cases actually good, right? But in our model, our business model, it's funny because when you talk with our BCBAs, their goal is that client eventually won't need ABA anymore. Isn't that funny? Like, you take on a client with the hopes that client won't need your.
And you mentioned 3 to 5 years, and you want the client to be independent.
So the whole goal is that we streamline them into a typical environment, and we also do that in our facilities. That's why we don't believe in-home only. We do offer in-home and school shadowing, but we do build that environment at our facility that will kind of simulate what they will face when they get to that typical environment out there.
Makes total sense. And so for someone that wants to open up an SOS franchise, how much is it going to cost? And I know it's going to depend on lease negotiating and everything, and leasehold improvements, working capital, but what's like a general range?
It usually costs around $200,000 to $300,000. That's going to include your rent, your payroll, your insurances, all the toys, the offices, the computers, everything that you need total. That includes the franchise fees in there with it. And, it's probably $200,000 in Florida and in Texas, but maybe $300,000 in New York and LA.
Sure.
It just, expenses are differently priced in different areas of town, the country.
So from me doing the calculation, 25 to 35% margin, you have 20 kids at 10,000 a kid. That's over 2 million. It seems like a very, very good business. Does it take a while to get at capacity, or I guess when do you start becoming profitable? Is it with 5 kids, 6 kids? What's like a general industry, not necessarily SOS, but general industry for breaking even in the ABA space?
General industry, and again, it varies depending on what your expenses are, but anywhere between 5 and 7 kids is your break-even number. Okay. And that's assuming that you full-time children. We do have some part-time children as well. But as far as the profit margin and being profitable, it all depends on your ability as a manager to save money. But I can say the first one that I opened was full within 9 months, like at capacity.
And what do you consider full?
No more physical room in the center to put another desk.
You had like 20, 30 students?
I had about 25 students in that little office space. Wow. And that's when I decided to open the second location. Okay. And that went almost to the day, 9 months.
So does SOS Franchising help with some of the pre-marketing so they could break even within the first couple months?
So far, every franchise that is open has had a client waiting list before they open. Finding clients is not the hard part. The demand is so high and the supply is so low. It is harder to find employees than it is to find clients.
So the HR side.
Which we also help with that too.
Okay, great. And why decide to franchise? You mentioned a bit these corporate companies that aren't necessarily doing the 1-to-1 ratio, and they have no connection in the industry, and they just probably care more about the money. Why franchise instead of you go out and grow and open up more centers?
Joe and I talk about this a lot, and of course, being both parents of kids with autism, to us, it's about the quality. We want to do whatever we can to give the kids the best therapy possible, because the earlier you get this done, the better off they are. And if the quality of your services are just low, they're not going to do it. They're not going to get as much progress early on than they would with high quality. So mom and pop shops that pay attention to their employees, that care about if someone gets angry in the lobby and all of these little things, they tend to have higher quality services. You pay attention better. But you can't serve all of the clients in the United States that need this. You can't do a service to the public if you only have one, and I can't do it on my own. I want to run them well. And so instead of being a big company that goes around and eats everybody else's little shop and runs everything on a cookie cutter platform, we are a combination of mom and pop shops holding hands.
That's great.
And the quality is there, but the support of the team as a whole is also there.
And are there, I mean, imagine some of these parents kind of can feel a little isolated and not know and just not informed, but you know, they go from maybe knowing just a couple other parents that have a child with autism to knowing now 20 parents overnight. Are there kind of is there a community between the parents of the clients?
Man, how did you even know to answer that question, Patrick? That's an amazing point. Being a special needs parent is very isolating and very lonely. You go in public and you're judged. Your families tell you, oh, he's just misbehaved, he needs a spanking, because they don't understand it's a brain abnormality because you can't physically see it. You can't take your kids on vacation like everybody else does. You don't get invited to birthday parties. It's very isolating. So we do create quite a very close-knit community between us and the parents among themselves. In fact, our business model is different than any other I've ever seen, in that we have a giant parent viewing room, and they can watch their kids through the camera system live, and the parents gather up in the room and they watch their kids at, drop off time or pick up time. And they talk about, oh my God, my kid does that too. Oh, I thought he was just weird. And oh, what did you do about this? And you make friends that are like you, and it's special. It's really special.
Yeah. No, it seems like a very warm environment that it's good for the clients, the parents, and all the stakeholders.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned all the existing locations are in Texas, and you have ones in development, New Jersey, New York, and Georgia. What other states would you want to grow in? Like, what do you see the opportunity? If you had to, if someone was moving to the United States and they could go anywhere and they're more focused on money, where would they go to open up an SOS franchise?
Honestly, because of the way that it's set up, because it's an essential healthcare service, because insurance will pay for this service, you don't need affluent clients. Autism does not care if you're born in the rich side of town or the poor side of town. It doesn't care if you're born in the country or in the city. It doesn't care if you're black or you're white. It affects everyone the same. So anywhere that you put a clinic is going to be successful. We haven't had anywhere that we ever looked at that we thought, that would be no good. It's in such high demand. In fact, only 30% of kids that have autism have access to ABA therapy. There's a 70%.
Is it mostly supply and awareness, or what's the reason?
There are no providers.
Okay.
There are not enough. There are only 30,000 analysts in the country, and there are how many, Joe? Like 1 million kids with autism.
And within that 30,000, only about 70% is actually in the autism field, because a lot of people don't know that ABA is not only for autism.
Yeah,
they actually apply for several other things. So out of that 30,000, really only about 70% is in the autism field. So imagine that to service everywhere else,
And you need one-on-one, and the capacity of the centers. Yeah, it makes total sense. How do you see the market? How was it during COVID? 2020 was a weird year for all of us. Tell me a little bit how it was for SOS.
We were affected, of course, by COVID, and we are an essential healthcare service, so none of the franchisees had to close. We all stayed open. We did have to change it up a bit. We did offer some in-home services as opposed to in-clinic. We put in new rules about how many kids could be in the clinic at one time, tons of sanitation protocols. What was interesting and what encouraged me that I had done the right thing with franchising is a lot of the mom and pop shops around Houston closed down, not because the government ordered them to, not because they were no clients willing to come in. It was because they weren't able to buy the supplies, because you need a mask and you need gloves and you couldn't buy Lysol and you couldn't buy hand sanitizer. But as a franchise, we were a big organization.
You pushed
We had big wholesale accounts and corporate accounts that allowed me to have access to gloves and masks, and we still have gallons and gallons of hand sanitizer. I don't think we'll ever go through it. I was so panicked about not having it. I just kept buying it. But I was able to disperse that to all the franchisees. And so having that big team behind you helped us survive that road bump. And it will not be the last pandemic. This is just the first. This is going to happen again. Yeah. We'll be way more ready next time. But knowing that you have support, and if your employees get sick, you can borrow some of mine or borrow from a sister location. It's so supportive, and we have more legs to stand on, really.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like you're definitely fostering a really good community of franchisees and just community overall. You know, I had one client that moved to Los Angeles. He opened a property management franchise, and it was the same kind of thing, little bigger system. But his first client came from another franchisee that was at capacity. And I could imagine, you know, something similar happening based on the ethos that you're building at SOS Franchising and the camaraderie.
That's correct.
And sales, so no closures, sales rebounded. How are they now?
Joe?
Well, we are pretty much where we were before the pandemic, which is it's an amazing thing to say when you look at what happened with the entire economy. Of course, certain locations will always do better than others for different reasons. Of course, in Texas, we are still struggling. It's only one of the 3 states that Medicaid is not fully covering ABA yet. So if that wasn't the case, we will probably be doing more than what we're doing prior pandemic at this point. But I want to say we are just a few months before that starts in Texas. But we are considered healthcare. We are healthcare providers, and there is a huge need. As a parent of a child with special needs, there's only so much you can do at home. And especially those kids that need actually more intensive care.
Sure.
You know, the parents are really, you know, they got to take these kids over to treatment. The kids want to go back, you know, into the centers because in there they have people that are skillful enough to help them cope and get going. So things are pretty much how they were before the pandemic, and we are seeing now in we are projected the first 2 quarters this year already to see an improvement versus 2019.
Yes. Every single franchise that is open as of right now is doing better in this January than the entire 2020. So we've recovered and then grown.
Somewhere. It's incredible. And I imagine this is going to be a compounding effect as you bring on more franchises, as there's more awareness, as you're able to secure employees more. So I'm really excited for the future SOS, and obviously we'll be working together closely, tracking your success. But Joe and Nicole, this has been an amazing live stream. Just wanted to conclude our discussion. How do you see the future changing and needs to prepare our kids with autism in the 21st century?
There are big things happening, huge things. So far, all of the federal regulations that have been put on ABA therapy has been in our favor, which you don't see in any other industry. The government is mandating insurances to pay for this service. We don't have to beg to be paid anymore. Autism is the only approved diagnosis so far that is a qualifying diagnosis for insurance to pay for ABA therapy. However, like Joe said before, it treats a number of disorders, It treats ADD, it treats ADHD, OCD, and other behavioral issues. And in the future, as more awareness occurs and as ABA becomes more readily available, as our franchise provides access to all these kids that need it, we will see the government and the legislation follow that as well, and will be open to different clientele. And it's only going to grow from here. We're just at the baby stages. This industry has so much more ceiling to go.
Thanks. Well said. And Joe, any concluding thoughts?
No, I mean, I just want to add, Ted, this business model that Nicole created in 2015 became a franchise. It's such an amazing company. You know, when I reached out to her, wanted to be a franchisee, I was like, if I were to create something, this is exactly what I would do, because it's such an amazing concept. It's really hard for you to find a concept that you can do good and yet make a really good, profitable business out of. And this is what we have to offer. Luckily, we are the only franchise in this field. So timing, it's on our side at this point, and any possible franchisee. Our franchise fee is very aggressive. Anybody who wants to connect with me after this live show, we can expand on that. But we set up in a way that's extremely aggressive for possible franchisees. So,
and it seems for those that are American passport holders or green card holders that they could get SBA financing. So I imagine, if it's 200 to 300K, they could come in with $70,000 cash and finance the rest.
I mean, you know how hard it is to get a concept approved with the SBA financing. And we got ours in like no time.
That's great.
Once they saw what we offer and the demand and the good that we do for the community, I mean, we got approved like in no time. So yeah, we can help throughout that whole process.
That's exciting. So I really appreciate having you two on. The industry's booming, relatively low investment when you look at the financial numbers in terms of top line sales and the industry profit margins. I will send an email to all those that registered today, so you can schedule a call with Joe and then later on Nicole in the franchise valuation process. If you like the video, share with your friends, like it, have any follow-up questions in the comment box, or email us at info@vettedbiz.com. And yeah, I just wanted to really thank Nicole and Joe. Really appreciate your time today. And that's the conclusion of Vetted Biz's Franchise Fridays.
Thank you so much.